Since exam season is approaching, we need to now shift our focus away from theory and working in the exam workbook to working on past paper questions and exam technique. This guide will show you what you need to do in order to transition your student from the theory to the exam practice. So the first thing that we need to do for our students is to create an exam revision timetable. I've got an example of one that I've created for my students over here. So as you can see, this is broken down by weeks and not by individual days. Firstly, if we were to break it down by individual days, that would be quite tedious, and any days missed would also make the whole plan meaningless because everything would need to be shifted forward and so on. So what we're doing is setting them weekly targets and saying, you manage your own time. If you need help managing that time, let us know. But within this week, you need to complete these targets. And what they need to do is they need to review the work they've done in the exam workbook. The whole point of working through the exam workbook during the course of the year is so that they can review their notes and answers made in the exam workbook at the end of the year when the important exams come around. So let's say, for example, in the week commencing the 28th of March, this student has to review their exam workbook notes on atomic structure, inorganic chemistry, and basics of organic chemistry. This particular student is a higher ability student, so I've also given them the task of working on past papers themselves during the week. So this is in addition to what I'll be doing with them in the session, right? So this is completely separate to what I'll be doing with them in the tuition sessions, and that's something I would expect them to do. And this is something I've agreed with them, by the way. So I create the plan, or you would create the plan, and you would present this to your student. They need to agree, they need to buy into the plan as well. And that's when you say, right, this is what we're setting going forward, and you need to complete these goals and objectives yourself. And creating this exam timetable will make it very, obvious to them what they need to work on. And then I suppose there's nothing more that you can do for them. They need to do the hard work behind this, but at least you've set out a map and a framework for what they need to do. Obviously, you do need to keep track of it and make sure that they are keeping up with the exam timetable, I suppose. But there's no way you can necessarily check that they've read up on everything, right? There's no way to do that. Obviously, you can check whether they've done the past paper and so on. But yeah, it is largely up to them. But keep asking them questions on whether they are on track with the revision plan or not. Okay. And secondly, in terms of completing past papers, just to remind everyone what they need to do in updating that on the online spreadsheet. So you need to go on the past papers tab and you need to give the description of your past papers. So let's say exam boards, month, year, paper one, whether it was A level or AS level or GCSE. I mean, for GCSEs, it's very obvious, of course, but if you're doing AS level or A level, make that very clear. And standard is where you just simply go through a paper, spend all the time in the world, which is okay. Maybe for starters, maybe for the first paper or something, that might be okay. Or maybe that's something the student can do in their own time, right? So if you've set, let's say, for example, for this particular student, I've set 2019 A-level paper 1 inorganic chemistry as homework. Okay, so I might put AQA June 2019 A-level paper 1. And I might just say, right, well, I've set it on this particular date. So let's say the 4th of April 22, and I know that's just set as a homework, for example. Okay, and then however, in the session, you should only be doing papers in one of two ways. You should either be doing a pressure test or you should be doing a strategy test. So just to emphasize a bit more on, what they mean. Okay, so let's just get a GCSE maths paper up. Okay, so let's say we've got this maths paper over here. Okay, so non-calculator. right? So strategy is when you are going through a paper and just informally discussing what needs to be done, right? So you would just sort of discuss the plan with them. Um, so in this particular case, whatever, nth term, and you would just get them to say, right, okay, so it's n+3, for example, all right? Or you would get them to sort of strategize the answer for that. So for something like this, it's very simple. It's just n+3, or they may not find it simple and you may need to talk them through it. But let's just say they give you the answer for this. You don't need to sort of wait around for anything else or write anything down. Just discuss that, move on. Maybe you can even skip some of the easier questions, right? Depending on the level of the student. So if a student's pretty good, you don't have to start from question 1 necessarily. Or you don't have to spend a lot of time on it anyway. Okay, so quickly go through the questions, scroll down, and just make the student look at it and have a discussion, right? Maybe you look at question 1 and think, not worth doing, right? Look at question 2, not worth doing. Okay, question 3, right, looks a bit harder. Let's maybe talk about this, right? Give the student some time to think over it and just ask them something like, what would you do for this question? Okay, how would you approach it? And then, they would informally tell you their plan. Whether they tell you all the steps or some of the steps doesn't really matter. You need to obviously try your best to guide them along with that. And remember, it's just informal. It's just a conversation. That's the whole point of strategy practice, right? So, okay, so here's a question that they might want to do, for example, and then it just says the diagram shows 4 graphs. Match which one's which. Again, they either would know this or wouldn't know this. I suppose the benefit of strategy practice comes more with something like this. All right. So you might just say, read the question and talk to me about how you would go about doing the question. The whole point is that you don't create pressure at the stage. Okay. You just sort of leave it up to them to to let them recall what information they know about this topic and talk to you about the answer, right? It's very informal. We're not writing anything down. We don't need to get anything perfect. They just casually talk to you as they would to a friend about how to go about doing this problem, right? Takes the fear away from the question and helps them focus on the forest from the trees. All right. Okay, so that's how you would go through a paper through the strategy approach. Okay, so hopefully you can see that with this approach, it's very informal, it's very relaxed. The fear of examinations is taken away, and we can also cover more ground. Okay, so when it comes to the really tough questions, like later on, question 14, question 15, the benefit of this really comes out because, again, remember, there's no pressure on them. Okay, it's very much okay. So what would your strategy be to approach this, right? And they can maybe list out the steps one by one, and then you can just have a very informal conversation with them about it. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Pressure testing is more obvious and more easy. So let's say, for example, here's question 16. You might start off by saying, well, here's part A. You've got 3 marks there. You're going to have 3 minutes to do this. Okay, off you go. Right. And if they don't do it within 3 minutes, you've got to stop them and say, right, you can't write anymore. By the way, just to make it very clear, for pressure testing, you would get them to write out the answer, right? And you would give them, let's say, 3 minutes for 3 marks, and then that means that they've got to complete it within that time. And if they don't do that within that time, you ask them to stop, and then you discuss with them how they could have completed that answer in the time available. Okay, so you might start off with, all right, just do part A, 3 minutes, just do part B, 1 minute. But then you might say, oh, well, here's question 17, that's worth 4 marks. Okay, you've got 4 minutes to do all of it. In fact, that's probably not a good example, but yeah, something like this where you've got a breakdown of a question, okay, rather than just saying, 1 mark for part A, 1 minute for part A, 2 minutes for part B, 2 minutes for part C. You might just say 5 minutes for all of this question, off you go, right? And see whether they can match that expectation. Once they're getting really good at that, maybe you can say, right, instead of giving you 5 minutes for this question, I'm going to give you 4 minutes or 3.5 minutes. and see how they cope with that, right? The idea is to put that pressure on them, right? And whenever you do a paper in that way, you've got to update it here accordingly, all right? So let's say, for example, I do AQA June 2017 AS level paper 2 with a student. Okay, and let's say I happen to do it on the 7th of April. I've got to update that, right? On the 7th of April, I've done a pressure test, and this is the paper that I've done, right? So whatever, same year, let's say I do paper 1, but this time I do it with a strategy approach, okay? I might do that there, and then that way I know that when I look at the spreadsheet, I know that you've done that particular paper on this date with a strategy approach. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if there's any questions about anything.